Might leave the meeting. Says we're being live streamed.
You're gonna have I'm not staying for this.
What type of I'll get my bottle.
All right, okay.
Have a joke, Daniel?
I'm leaving the first joke to you tonight. Seeing as I think you won the favorite joke of the previous one, so that means you get to go first. Anyway, I think should we get underway?
Do I have good bandwidth? Can you hear me okay?
So far so good. Last time it was sometimes it was going on and off at times, but sounds all right now.
Okay, I'll just leave it on this one. I've got a couple of options for internet.
Okay, great. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Parsha chat between myself, Rabbi Daniel Rabin, and my colleague, Rabbi Dovid Gutnick from East Melbourne Hebrew congregation. And I see the same people who were in your shul last time we spoke are there tonight. They haven't left the background. So, yeah, it's wonderful to have you all with us. And of course, I think the last time we had this, we had also just gone into lockdown. I can't even recall now. And now we've got another extension here in Melbourne. So anyway, just wishing you all well. And hopefully this week is not too difficult for you. So tonight, as usual, we're going to go through a discussion, a chat about the Parshat Shoftim. And please, if you have any questions, any comments, as I said last time we learned together, if we were sitting together in the same room, then of course we would love you to participate, to share your views, to share your thoughts. Obviously, in the Zoom context, it's not possible. So please use the chat function if you wanted to ask either myself or Dovid or both of us a question. So good evening, Dovid. How's what was supposed to be the last day in lockdown? How's your day been?
Yeah, Baruch Hashem, well, but a little bit choppy with my internet. So I'm going to switch across. Hang on.
Okay.
All right. I think we're good. Yeah, that should be a bit better. You were breaking up slightly on my other. Yeah, thank God. And it's also nice to see everyone. And we're going to have a few. I told some of my congregation they can come on and we'll share a few words just to touch base with everyone because I'm not seeing too many of my congregants at the moment. So nice to see people at least through the screen, and hopefully everyone's going well. And we're used to what we're doing. It's a very it's another fascinating and excellent parsha with lots of food for thought, especially in the context of some of the dramas we have in the world around us today.
Absolutely. So, Dovid, just a very quick overview for people in terms of this parsha. Obviously, it's Parshat Shoftim, and which means judges, and obviously based on the opening word Shoftim v'shotrim, that you should place judges and officers in all your gates, in your cities, in your towns, etc. And apparently there's, I think I've just got here in front of me, the Chumash, 14 positive mitzvot in this week's parsha and 27 prohibitions that exist in this parsha. So a lot of action, as you mentioned, a lot of interesting, certainly lots to discuss and to analyze and to ponder on. So if I may begin, just a very quick thought, and then obviously I'm sure we'll get wrapped into other subjects as well. But I remember when I was in, I think it was year 7 or 8, or all these years sort of all seem mixed in at when you get to a certain point. But we had a particular teacher who used to love asking us in Chumash class. He used to ask all the time and say, was there any extra words in this parsha? Any extra letters? And we would all say, no, of course, Rebbe, it can't be. How can there be anything extra? And then he'd say, you're all wrong. There's an extra word. And we were all like, there's an extra word in the parsha. How could that be? It's impossible. The Torah is supposed to be exact. It's supposed to be precise. How could Hashem have made any mistakes? And then, of course, he would go on to tell us, Kinderlach, it's not a mistake. It's here to teach us a lesson. And when I was looking at the parsha this morning in anticipation of our shir tonight, this memory came to me from this week's parsha. And what's the extra word, or the possible superfluous word? It's, if you're looking in the beginning, Shoftim v'shotrim, titen lecha b'chol sharecha. In Hebrew, you could say, Shoftim v'shotrim, titen b'chol sharecha, place in all your gates. What does it mean, titen lecha? You should place in all your gates. The word titen already implies you should. And so, of course, there's the well-known understanding the well-known interpretation that each of us has to place certain guardrails and certain barriers and certain protective practices in place when it comes to our own particular ways that we approach the world, that we deal with the world. And in fact, there's three main gates that need protection and three main gates that need to be supervised. And those are what we put in our mouths, and I guess what comes out of our mouths, what we see, and of course what we hear, what we listen to. And so when the Torah is telling us to place judgment and police officers, I think it applies to each of those three gateways, if you like, to your own mind, to your own behavior. Certainly, you need to sometimes stop what you're going to eat, of course, in the context of kosher, but also looking after ourselves, being healthy. How many times do we feel like, oh, just one more piece of cake? It feels so good. It tastes so delicious. Place something there to stop it. And of course, what goes out of our mouths, how we treat others, how we speak to others, the way we come across, and of course, what we look at, what we allow ourselves to see, and of course, how we look at things. Now, do you see judgmentally? Do you look at people through a positive lens, or are you always looking through a critical lens? And then, of course, what you allow yourself to hear. Do you listen to Lashon Hara, or do you try and find words of encouragement, words of Torah? So lots to practice in terms of our own. If we look at our own body and our own selves as an entire world, entire city, we have to put that into focus.
Not bad. Good start. It feels like those. Let me know if I break up again, Daniel. So in case, because I'm having a bit of a slow internet night here. It seems like all my neighbors are on my. But it feels like those. You'd have these rapping duels when rappers would duel. So first you put down your rap, and then I have to match it or overcome it, and then and away we go. So that was a good marker, a good starting point. I think.
Given that you said that, I'm going to expect you to sing your piece now.
For those that are joining, by the way, we don't rehearse this in advance at all. We're just relying on our natural symmetry. And I was worried I'd run out of things to say tonight, so I got my wife on standby, Rachel. She actually teaches Devarim in Beth Rivka High School, so we might pass it on to especially with knowing that Bina Yasera Nitna Leisha, that greater insight and wisdom comes from the women. So we'll get to that possibly soon. But the interesting, sorry, I got these messages coming. The interesting thing about the gates and the guardians. So Shoftim and Shotrim, we know that in a system of law like what we live in, there are generally three areas. There is the great division between these areas. Your
internet's having trouble again, Dovid.
Oh, is it? Okay. All right. Well, don't worry. We've got a backup plan. Hang on. Hold fire.
It's always good to have a backup plan. And as someone like you who's in the army, that's part of your mantra, no? You always have to have an alternative route if the one's blocked. I don't know if I just made that up.
The problem is if the backup plan goes down as well. So let's see if this version is better. How are we going so far?
Yeah, it's got now all the bars are up, and so it looks like your internet's stable.
Okay, let's hope we remain stable. So the legislation is the government, the arm of the government. Yeah. The judiciary is the arm of jurisprudence and decisions about law, the application of law in a legal setting. And then the shotrim, the police or the enforcers of the law are, as we know, the police and the defense forces. And so you've got these three levels or three tiers that make up a law-abiding society. So I think there is a similar thing with regards to your idea that you just shared, that this applies to us, that we need to have a protection over our own gates, that there are three tiers to that protection as well. Yeah. There's a level of considering what comes in and goes out of all of our gates. Even in fact, when I read this idea in the books, I even read the nose as well as a gateway. Although we don't work the sense of smell as much as the other senses when we talk about a gateway but actually the sense of smell is the most profound of the senses. That's why we smell after Shabbos to touch our soul. So there's also, I don't want to be talking here about kind of inappropriate incenses and things like that, but there is still a gateway that's required when it comes to the sense of smell and the nose as well, which is an interesting addition. But the idea of first having discernment and decisions around what is right and what is wrong, much like the judiciary and even the legislative arm of our legal system, and also having an enforcer, a shoter, a police, somebody that, because it's not one and the same. Sometimes you can know this thing is wrong for you. Your, so to speak, your internal legislator, your internal judiciary tells you this is the wrong thing. But for whatever reason, you still give in to that craving, or you still crack under the desire or the passion or the need. So there is a secondary thing of creating barriers, of creating like a policing yourself by even once you know that it's the wrong thing, policing yourself so that you don't come to breach it. Some of these things are like the gates that the sages made so that we shouldn't come to do the wrong thing, even though we know it's the wrong thing. Sometimes we can slip into temptation. So, for example, the laws of yichud, of respecting the boundaries between the genders, and so, which is all about protecting ourselves, that kind of enforcement process, protecting ourselves from doing what we know is wrong. So there's those multiple levels in our spirit and practice as well. So that's what I'll add to your wrap with my wrap.
That was a really good wrap, mate. Hard to come back on that one. So yeah, brilliant. So you need that discernment, you need that level of judgment, and the enforcement. You need to put those.
Yeah.
I just on that note, just something really interesting in terms of, obviously as adults we have to be role models to our children. And even if we don't have our own children necessarily, the younger generation looks to our behavior. Sometimes I know there's a lot of discussion nowadays about the vaccines, and everyone's saying, the rabbi should come out and make a statement. The rabbi should say, get a vaccine. And like I said, look, the greatest way that you can inspire someone or encourage someone to get a vaccine is to show them that you've done it. You can preach from today till tomorrow, but unless you're actually doing what you're preaching, it's all just hot air, really. And in terms of, that, seeing that something is valid and value to you, rather, that you find something important, when our children see us, if they see that something is, that you have discernment about something, that you take your time to think about something, that you have a judgment and an enforcement about a particular area, like kashrut, you'll see an interesting phenomenon, when it comes to kosher. For those who keep strict kosher, your children never really fight you on kosher. If you go to a shop and they see you, like Coles or Woolworths, all these supermarkets, always having right by the cashier, they always put the things that they want to tempt you on. The last minute, the last second decision. There's nice chocolates and lollies and candies, and they were like, the kids, I want that, Tati, I want that, Mum. And you're like, no, it's not kosher. And there's no argument. They stop, forget about it. But going to a kosher supermarket, like a Kraus or a Kosher Kingdom, where they know everything's kosher, mate, it could be World War III if you say no to a chocolate bar or to a lolly. Because why? Because they know that kosher is important to you, but they've seen dad or mum eating the ice cream, eating the chocolate. So as much as you say it's not healthy, unless you really believe it's not healthy, they'll challenge you on that. And I think kids are a great discerner of truth and of values.
Yep.
So you've got to be real.
And that's going to appear later in the parasha when it refers to this advantage or this imperative to be tamim, to be sincere or wholehearted, because the word tam, which is tied into what you're saying about the approach of children, because the word tam, when we think of it in the context of our Pesach Seder, it's not the predominant child of the four children at the Seder, right? We've got the Chacham, the Rasha, the She'eni Elisha, and the Tam is, we say, the simple one, and it's quite a simple, short stanza there. Yeah. You say Tam, yet in this week's parasha, we have this most beautiful and powerful imperative and command to be Tamim, to be wholehearted, to be sincere, almost a little bit simplistic in the way we approach life. And one of the ways we see that, there's many ways to apply this commandment. And in the context of this parasha, it's talking about not engaging in divinations or necromancers or tarot card readers or seances and these types of things, all of these black magic and extraterrestrial stuff. But and so it says tamim, you should be wholehearted, you should be sincere, you should trust. And there's a great kind of, I guess, example of that from children in particular, this idea of tamimut, of kind of a simple sincerity, with the wide eyes, the acceptance, the trust. There's all of the complex fears that we generate as adults don't exist in a healthy child at any rate, or a child that's had a good upbringing and so on. So that really ties into that idea as well. Yeah,
that wholesomeness, that complete, there's a halachic term, as masiach lefi tumoy. And often when you want to get the true sense of a person is when they're answering a question not knowing what particular ramification their answer might have. So they're just answering it innocently. Yeah. It's the innocence, which is not, sometimes the word tam, as you mentioned in the Seder, gives a little bit sometimes the wrong connotation. Like you think this person is just very simple. They're not, but it actually can be a very profound level where the person is tam. If they're really just sincere, they're wholesome, they come in from a really beautiful point of view. But in terms of the judgment and the discernment, there's another very well-known line that comes early on in the parsha, which is when it comes to enforcing justice, when it comes to, when tough decisions need to be made, the Torah tells us, tzedek tirdof, you should, righteousness you shall pursue. And of course, the obvious question that many of the commentators raise is why the double expression of tzedek tirdof. As I said in the beginning, we don't just throw in extra words for the sake of it. The Torah is not about, being poetic. It's not its purpose. It's not its goal. It's not a work of literature in that sense. It's rather it's a guide. It's a lesson. It's a law book. It's words of Hashem. And so why add tzedek? Is it just to tell us the importance of justice? Maybe. But I think sometimes what the Torah is telling us is when you're pursuing justice, often you behave incorrectly. You don't pursue it in a just way. And so when you do have to at times make tough calls, when you do have to make certain decisions, whether it be with your children, with a colleague, you have to make sure that you fulfill that edict, which is tzedek tirdof. When you are being righteous, make sure that you do so righteously. How many times have you seen, God forbid, principals who have to, perhaps punish a child or to get rid of a child? There's many ways you can do that. If you have to get rid of an employee at times, there's many ways you can do that, and so the Torah is telling us, tzedek, when you are going about your business and you do have to, as I said, sometimes lay the law of the land down, make sure that you don't forget that tzedek, the second tzedek. So I think it's a very important lesson that we can have in any one of our interactions. Always pursue things through a righteous and a just way, but in a righteous and just manner. I saw you had a sefer there. You had a book. It looked like you were about to pull out a level one shelf rack in inverted commas.
No, I was all good. I'm balancing out my thoughts so that we don't, I don't want to make the parsha top heavy, focus all on the first few psukim of the parsha.
Yeah, that's a good point. We can jump, we're both very good at, I think you're pretty good at skipping as well. No, you can jump, you're a fit guy. So I think we can handle jumping around.
All right, so let me throw one more in then for the beginning, and then we'll move on. So when you said before that you need to have shoftim and you need to have shotrim, and to protect yourself from the things that can lead you astray, and you have to guard your gates of your body, your mouth, your eyes, your ears, even your nose. So it's interesting when you look in the Amidah that we read, we actually have a prayer, Hashiva shoftenu kvarishona, return our judges like the good old days when we had good judges, when we had good spiritual leaders and judges, return it back to those days, not present company excluded. Of course, we're good quality as well, but we can't compare to the good old days. So, return those days. And Hashiva shoftenu kvarishona v'yo atzenu, and advisors. Interesting to note that the word shoftenu is like this week's Parsha Shoftim, but there's no mention of the second half, shotrim. There's no mention of police officers. So it's interesting that when it talks about that blessing or that prayer, and we're asking Hashem to restore those days, it's obviously a prayer for the Messianic age, a time when, there will be a need for the dissemination of wisdom, but there won't necessarily be a need for the dissemination of enforcement, because we will be grown up enough, we will be mature enough to be able to understand that if this is the right thing and it's taught to us as the right thing, we will do it. We will have the ability for, and we'll talk about this again later maybe, but the mind to rule the heart and to apply the lessons of the Torah and the lessons of our judges. And we won't need that enforcement, which is a kind of a, you'd like to think that 90% of society practices the law without the need for enforcement. The days of kind of needing to hold your breath when you go past a police car, should be well and truly over. But the idea that we will be able to enforce ourselves is a very important one as well, in the maturity of society, the maturity of ourselves, and also in a description of the Messianic age that we daven for every day.
Beautiful. Yeah, I mean, halavai, please God, we want. It's a utopian society, really, where you don't need people to enforce this. Your own moral system and compass is the one which. There's that famous story. I can't recall which one of the famous Rabin it was about, but he was so impressed. It was in the times when I think in Russia it was illegal to own alcohol, which sounds a bit weird, to have the alcohol illegal. But it was a story of a Pesach where they went to go look for, I think there was a decree in heaven, and the Rebbe sent one of his Talmidim, one of his students, to go knock on one of the local villages and ask him for some vodka. And the guy said, no vodka. It's illegal. How can you ask me for something? And he came back and the guy said, no. And the Rebbe said, go ask him again. Asked him again. And eventually said, tell him you're willing to pay for it. And once he said, I'm willing to pay for it, all of a sudden the guy brought out from the cupboard, okay, yeah, I'll sell it. And then he said, go ask the Yid down the road, say the Rebbe wants a bottle of vodka. He knocked on the door. He said, I want a bottle of vodka. And the guy said, it's Pesach. He said, but the Rebbe wants. The Rebbe said, he'll give anything for it. He said, I don't have it. Unfortunately, it's Pesach. And the Rebbe said, you see, here, where there's chametz on Pesach, Hashem's not going to do anything. What's going to happen? The image of getting struck down by lightning doesn't happen. I mean, it certainly hasn't happened to me. And no one I've ever met told me they've been struck by lightning the minute they did something wrong. So it's literally your own belief system. I don't need a police officer to come tell me this. I believe the Abishah said, Hashem said this is important, and so I'm not going to have chametz and Pesach. And that's probably what you're talking about. That ability to self-govern and to self-regulate yourself.
Yeah, and common sense, whilst it's not that common, it's amazing to think how many people inherently and implicitly know what's right. We always need a reminder from time to time, but that's all right. What else? Kings?
No, so we can go to Kings. I don't mind talking about Kings, but there's a part of this parasha which is just so beautiful, and that is, when we talk about that the person is like a tree of the field.
Oh yeah.
A very, very special area in Torah, I find.
Yeah, so you've gone to the laws of armed conflict. In my military chaplaincy, they taught me that at Duntroon, Loak, laws of armed conflict. So this week's parasha has the most laws of armed conflict. And, in the army, there's actually quite a few very religious Christians that kind of see the military service as kind of almost a service of the Lord in a certain way. We kind of got the Kol Yaakov going, but the Yadayim Yadayeh, so they've got this really kind of strength of it. So it's actually a great controversy. It's been brought up in the papers and in media and so on, that the chaplaincy badge that we wear on our hat says in Latin. I don't exactly even know what the Latin words are, but the translation of it is "in this sign conquer." It's got a big cross, and it's "in this sign conquer." And it's got but they actually love quoting the verses from this week's parasha about war and conflict and not being afraid and being strong, because Hashem, the Lord, is with you. So there's a great element to, and within there it's written about not cutting down fruit trees when you're at war. It says because the human is like a tree of a field. Yeah,
and it's interesting because this parasha, the beginning, I serve as a police chaplain, you serve as an army chaplain, so it's we both feel very passionate about this parasha because the beginning speaks about the police and the end refers to soldiers. So very relevant parasha. But yeah, it tells us not to cut down trees of the field, because it says the reason why we shouldn't cut down fruit trees because ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh, because as you mentioned, because mankind is like the tree of the field. I saw a really beautiful idea based on a midrash on this pasuk. It says that there's three types of shadows that can be cast in this world. One says the shadow of a bird. The other says that there's a shadow of a wall. And the third is the shadow that's provided by a tree. And the idea of this concept is that really we can have one of those three impacts that we can have on the world around us. So of course, the fleeting shadow of a bird refers to someone who doesn't really think about the impact that they're having on the world. They don't really care about the mark that they leave. They're just going from one experience to the next. There's nothing really about how can I help another person? How can I have a benefit to society? How can I be of use to others around me? It's just about me, me, me. And so when they leave this world and they look back, they just see there's just this fleeting shadow, no mark is left. And then you have others who are more like a wall, which is it's more stable. There's obviously a shadow, but what's the reality of a shadow on a wall is that it comes twice a day, basically. It comes in the morning, it comes at night. When the sun is rising, the sun is setting, it casts that shadow. And that really represents sort of, people when they're young, they're very enthusiastic, they're prepared to go to demonstrations and protests, they're prepared to volunteer. And of course, as you get to sort of the later years of your life, you've got more time, you've got more, your kids have grown up, you're probably living in a retirement place. And so therefore, again, you have that energy. And the question is, are you only leaving sort of a mark at the beginning and end of life? But when you're in the middle of life, when you're working your jobs, you're running around with your kids, are you thinking about how am I having an effect, a positive effect on the world around me? Then, of course, the greatest impact is like that of a tree. The shadow of a tree is always there, whether it's the beginning of the day, the end of the day. It means this person is continuously thinking, how do I make a difference to this world, even when I'm no longer here? And that's really something we all got to contemplate every single day. Like, what am I doing today that's going to make a difference to the world tomorrow? And there's a beautiful story in the Talmud about, I think the rabbi we just studied it recently in Gemara Tainit, where they saw this guy planting a carob tree, and apparently it takes 70 years for the fruit to grow. And he said, you're planting a carob tree. It was an older man, I guess. And he said, you're not going to get to taste this. He said, I'm not planting it for me. I'm planting it for my grandchildren. They're going to taste the fruit. And I thought that was a really special concept. That's what a tree represents. A tree represents not just about me. It's about what's coming from my actions that are going to make a difference to the world around me.
And it's the shkoyach, that was good. And similarly, one of the ideas that we think about with regards to a tree is that the tree, one of the things that it allows is the trees are so significant. And it's not just fruit trees, of course. I mean, fruit trees have the extra advantage that they're providing sustenance for consumption, for actually eating. But the trees, as they provide oxygen for the world as well, are a great enabler of life. And this idea of growth and of life and of enabling life, very powerful metaphor for what humans are supposed to be. We are supposed to be productive, creative, and most importantly, enabling oxygen for those around us. There's certain people that I shouldn't focus on the negative. We call them oxygen thieves. They're kind of drawing the oxygen out of the room. So here's the contrary. Kind of real empowerment to be somebody who is one who provides oxygen for others, brings kind of a refreshment and a life force to others. I do remember in school they took us on an excursion, and we got to look at trees amongst other things. It was like an arborist type of activity, I guess. We had to look at. It was actually grade 6. We also had to collect insects. It was quite an exciting camp. It was a camping trip. Wonderful. And when we looked at the trees, so one of the things we learned about are the rings of the trees that connote it's the years that it's existed. So obviously growing an extra layer and an extra layer. And then when the tree was cut, you could see the amount of the different rings representing the different years, and potentially even a little bit of a trauma amongst some of those years. And you could see that in the rings as well. And that's also a kind of a consideration for a metaphor for the human being as well. We don't look at our aging process as a diminishment. We actually look at it as another layer and then another layer, and we kind of build our experiences, which ends up making for a great solidity and a great kind of regalness in its stature and its height and its strength, rather than the kind of the diminution that some people look at.
I love that idea. I like the oxygen analogy that you mentioned. That if your modus operandi, if your whole raison d'etre is to go around and say, how can I give life? How can I give breath to the world around me? I mean, you can imagine what kind of a person you're going to become. You're going to become a person who's going to do acts of kindness. You're going to be encouraging. You're going to be helping.
Yeah.
I mean, a tree also takes the bad air, the carbon dioxide, and it filters it and it cleans it, doesn't it? So it's not only just about providing, good air. It's about also being able to purify your surroundings. To take negativity and to try and turn it into something positive. To never look at someone and say, "Oh, I'm just writing them off." No, if I can work with them, if I can encourage them, if I can show support, perhaps I can turn it into oxygen, which is now going to be breathable. So lots of ideas with this tree. That's why the Torah tells us, I guess, because we are the tree of the field. And also the roots, the famous idea of the roots, a tree which has deep roots, doesn't matter how strong the wind is, stays strong. Whereas a tall tree with short roots, it might look impressive. It might look like it's never going to be wavering, but a particular wind can come and knock it down. So in life, you always got to make sure you've got your roots strong. Tie yourself into, whether it's to family values, of course, to Torah values. It doesn't matter. Then stay low. It doesn't matter, because then you're not going to get knocked down. No matter what the winds of culture come across you, you'll stay firm to your beliefs and stay firm to your values and your morality.
Yeah, strong roots as well. That's a big part of it. And you actually, when you were talking about that air and breath component, we've been talking about that in our shiur that we have with the shul on Mondays. We've been learning some of the Gemaras and about it. And one of the interesting things we noted is that, yes, it talks about God creating through speech, but actually bringing sustenance to humankind, life to humankind via breath. He blew into Adam the breath of life. And we looked at the soul, the three of its names for the soul, Ruach, Nefesh, and Neshama, are all linked to breath. This idea of kind of this oxygen giving or this breathing process is for the soul. We looked at Shabbos, for example, called Shabbos Vayinafash. Shabbos is like a breath of fresh air. It's like so this idea of breathing life into things is a very powerful metaphor, a very godly kind of metaphor, and it links us to our soul and to our Creator very strongly. So it's thanks for touching that.
Wonderful, mate.
My light just went out.
I know you wanted to. What happened?
One of my lights above me went out while I was talking. What does it mean, Daniel? What do you think it means?
It means the shiur, what you just said. Everybody erase it from your memories. Not listen to what Dovid just told you.
It just blew the electricity out. Okay. Anyways, what
else?
I
think it meant that you're creating such power, such energy, that anything around you is just becoming absolved and just becoming totally nullified in your light. You don't need the light anymore. You're creating light. There's another. I know you wanted to speak about kings, so we'll get to kings shortly. But there's another really fascinating part of our parasha, which I think you can spend a lot of time dwelling on this, and that is this concept of what we call the egla rufa, where there's somebody who's found, lying in the field, and nobody knows what happened to this person. Nobody knows who killed this person, what was their story, what was their particular circumstance that led them to that particular death. And there's this whole process where the different towns have to measure which town was closest. And, once they establish the closest town, they, in a sense, take responsibility. And there's this whole process where they got to slaughter an animal, etc. But there's one idea in this particular story. And look, again, I'm sorry if I'm mentioning such few details if you're not familiar with the full context of that area in the parasha. But one idea, if you look at that section, I was reading in sometimes, I did this degree in psychology and psychotherapy. And so often I get sent articles from the university. They keep sending stuff years after you've joined there, And there was an article recently about apologizing. When you've made a mistake and you've hurt somebody, you've wronged somebody, and how do you actually go ahead and apologize? And it's quite a skill to apologize, because many people get it wrong. What's one of the most common ways of apologizing, which never actually sounds like an apology, is one word that gets stuck in that apology. And what's that word? David, what am I referring to? Do you know?
Are you testing me? I'm
the
listening.
Word but. It's not a Jewish thing. Don't worry. The word but, the word but. Where you sort of classify, or you sort of give. I'm putting the precursor. You did this and this. I'm sorry, but. I hurt you, but. And the paper was saying that anything that comes after the word but is what the person hears. And they say, if I say to you, Dovid, I'm sorry what I did to you, but I was having a bad day, all you're hearing is that I was having a bad day. No longer is it applicable that I've apologized to you. And so you see, interestingly, when these rabbis of this town, or the leaders of this town, when they, in a sense, taking ownership and responsibility for this mistake, even though they didn't even do the mistake, they don't say but. They say something has gone wrong and now we're going to fix it. So the paper says when you want to have an apology, you say the word and. And it's also not only when you apologize, even when you're saying good things like telling your wife, I love you, don't ever follow that word with a but. I love you, but I wish that you would do this and that. Because again, all they're going to hear is this part after the but. If you want to give something feedback, you use the word and. And it's amazing because I think this section tells us how to really, if you want to admit you've done something wrong, if you want to come clean, make sure you do it in the right way. So practice that. Think about next time you tell someone something, whether it be words of praise or words of apology, try and pay attention if you've been adding that one word in there, because it undermines either the words of encouragement or love or the words of apology.
That was a very good Dvar Torah, but I'm not sure about one point. No, that was. There is another one in apologies that sometimes I notice as well lately, especially when you've offended a whole group of people on Twitter. With something outrageous that you've posted or whatever. They say if.
Yeah.
If for those who might have been offended, or
if I offended you.
I apologize. It's also it ties into the word but, because it's an equivocation. It's not fulsome. It's not wholehearted. It actually takes us back to the beginning of the parsha where he said, be wholehearted, be fulsome, like a child, fully expressing yourself, not equivocating or hedging your bets or whatever it is. So whether you're saying if you've been offended, or whether you're saying I apologize, but I was, I didn't mean, I was having a bad day, whatever it is. I think both of them are kind of words of equivocation that show. But this idea of the Eglah Rufa, we could probably just speak about that alone. It's an extraordinary section in the Torah. It's linked to the story of Yosef. He was learning it with his father when he was taken away and kidnapped by his brothers. And it's tied in that idea that what had happened to his brothers was the fault of the community, not just the brothers. That this idea of broader responsibility, or responsibility of leaders, responsibility of the community. So these leaders had no responsibility for this murder. It was a murder who we didn't know who the perpetrator was. Am I still on?
Yeah, we hear you.
Oh, yeah. We didn't know who done it, but the leaders are required to take responsibility on behalf of the community, and they have to say a whole statement, and they have to perform a whole ritual, and that ritual has to be done by flowing water. And it's a great kind of idea of mutual responsibility, because I can tell you, I've got this dream, and many human beings share this dream of just running away from society. There's this Eddie Vedder, or who's that singer who sings the song Society? This is not the singing bit, by the way. The society, it's crazy, it's horrible. You want to just flee from society, go off the grid. Like some of my congregants have lovely little shacks, holiday shacks, beach shacks. Get away from it all, and just shut down on society. This is not an option the Torah is telling us. The Torah is saying if there is a murder in your community, or not in your community, out of your town, but you're the nearest town, you share some of the responsibility for the depraved actions of another. We're all interlinked. So a society that is showing signs of decay isn't something we flee from. It's something that we're empowered and in charge to try and respond to and to make a difference. Now, we don't think we can make much of a difference. And the famous Gemara is about Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia, it says, this is what he did. He started his career. He grew flax. He took the flax, he turned it into nets. He used the nets to capture deer. He used the deer to feed the poor and the orphans, and he used the skin of the deer to produce megillas or scrolls. On the scrolls, he would write the Torah, and he would teach the Torah to 5 children, each child one book of the Torah. And then he would use other scrolls to teach them Mishnah, 6 orders of the Mishnah. And then he would empower those children to go ahead and teach another 5. So you take what I've taught you and teach now. And through that, there was this ripple effect. So he wasn't a farmer and he wasn't a hunter, but he did all these things in order to say, I'm not going to run away from a world that is ignorant or that is apathetic or that is miserable or that's got lots of issues in it and crumbling. I'm going to aspire to make a difference. I know it sounds like a cliche, but that's precisely what he did. So this kind of idea of a responsibility for society and kind of trying to tell us to move away from this idea of fleeing from a decaying society is this Eglah Rufa chapter in this week's parasha, which is quite an extraordinary message.
It is a very extraordinary message. And, to take that one step further, I think, if you look at the wording that is used, it says there, Ki yimatzei halal ba'adama, asher Hashem Elokecha, anyway, nofel b'sadeh, if you find this person who's lying in the field. And, of course, as you mentioned, there's relevance to you saying, look, even though we didn't commit the murder, God forbid, we have a responsibility, but it goes one step further, and that is the fact that the Torah says that this person was out in the field, in the field representing that time, meaning the person was away from the community. They weren't sort of walking around in the shtetl, in the near the camp of the Jewish people. This person was out in the middle of nowhere. And that's where I think the responsibility lies. The Torah is saying is, had you been welcoming, had you made that person feel part of the community, had you greeted them, and so it could even be such a simple thing. Like I was just at East Melbourne Synagogue before lockdown, and I felt so welcomed. And I'm not just saying it, but people welcomed you. And I know that at South Caulfield, the members do the same thing. But you wouldn't have found me wandering the streets of East Melbourne because they turned me away or they were rude to me. You never have found me in the field. And that's a credit to you and your Rebbitzin. But here the responsibility was that this person, unfortunately, the biggest or the first mistake or the first error that this person sadly was in the field. And I think we have a responsibility not only to us, to our fellow Yidden, but certainly I know that and I know, Dovid, you take this very as a big responsibility, so, being out there in East Melbourne where you have a lot of people who come to convert as well, and sometimes one of the most difficult things for somebody who's in the process of conversion is they don't feel part of the community. It's daunting, it's scary, they don't know people, they don't know who the members of the shul are. And so all of us, this Eglah Rufa is telling us, don't let it get to, God forbid, a murder. Don't even let it get to the point where the person's wandering in the field. We've got to stop it way before then. And that's each of our responsibility. So it's not just mine and yours, Dovid, it's everybody who's listening to this chat.
Yeah.
Because
absolutely.
we all can do that. We can all, if you've been coming to shul for 5 years or 2 years or 3 years, and a newbie walks in, greet them. Say, where you're from, what you're doing, welcome. Here's where you can find the Siddur. Here's where you can find a talit if it's for the men. So we all have that responsibility, one to the other.
And the other word that is interesting is that it says that should a slain person be found on the Adamah, this idea of Adamah is touching on all the way back at the beginning of the Torah, where it says when Cain killed Hevel, the wording that kind of is used in the Torah and Hashem uses is that the blood of your brother is crying out from the Adamah, from the ground, from the soil, it's like the soil has become polluted by so it's very graphic and strong and jarring imagery that the Torah uses in order to remind us that this murder might have had nothing to do with you as a perpetrator or even as an enabler, but it cries out, and you cannot be silent when such a kind of a pollution cries out to you. And I think of it in the context, and I know this might be a bit of a stretch, but I put it in the context of having the shul in the city, and the amount, especially now, because it's not diluted by the amount of people that are working in the city. It's almost like the city's been left just with the people that are homeless and that are sleeping rough and that are on the streets. And this idea of saying, take them away. It's not a good look for Melbourne to have them there, hide them somewhere or whatever. It's the exact opposite of this idea of a shared responsibility for something that is imperfect or needs rectification, or somebody who needs help and support. And there's a lot of stigma, and it can be very challenging, and it can even, appear to be unsafe at times to engage in the activity of trying to assist in this area of society, what society needs. But actually, it's a really interesting challenge to ourselves and to some of our, like I said, some of our stigmas and so on, is to see what can I do to help what some would describe as kind of like a stench or or a pollution, it's actually something that's calling out. It's a calling for us to respond to it. And we try to do that within the resources that we have. We have a rule at the shul that we don't give money because that might go. But then it can also be very kind of pretentious or jarring for the person who's sleeping right after. Come, I'll buy you a meal, as if you don't trust them or with the empowerment of having some finance at their disposal. So it's a delicate walk, and it requires a real dance at times. But it's just one example of something that calls to us from the earth, from society.
A great example, because as you said, sometimes we can talk about these concepts and it's just, okay, big deal, it doesn't apply to me, it doesn't apply in my life. Very nice that the rabbi said this, but there's nobody in my life that I have to worry about. And that's why I was saying it's relevant to each and every one of us.
I'm going to bring my Rebbitzin in. She was on the other thing, but she's got something to add. Is that okay?
I want to interrupt and I couldn't unmute.
Absolutely.
So I'm coming over here. Is that all right?
Yeah, of course. I'm just in my office. Otherwise, I would invite Sarah to come sit with me.
Yeah, okay. Let's do
try.
that for next time. Let's do that.
Yeah, maybe we'll do a couples discussion next time.
Yeah, we all have things to share. We can just talk and talk.
No shortage of words. Trust me.
Yeah. I wanted to just tie it into what you were saying before about our responsibility in looking after others and what Dovid was talking about as well. The end of last week's Parsha, yes, it was Parshat Re'eh, but it's still connected to this Parsha. It tells us the rules of the Shalosh Regalim about our obligation to go up and celebrate Yom Tov in Jerusalem 3 times a year. And we have a separate injunction warning us that, yes, while we have a mitzvah to be happy on Yom Tov, we have to make sure we include everyone in our celebrations. We have to include the Levi, the Ger, an orphan, and a widow. And if you look at these 4 categories of people that the Torah specifies, these are the 4 really vulnerable people or categories of people who didn't have, back in those days, a husband to speak for them. So they were widowed, they were orphaned, or they were a Levi. They were relying on other people to support them. They didn't have their own income. They didn't have their own properties. They just were relying on the funding of the people, and the convert who might feel alienated when it comes to Jewish people celebrating Yom Tov. So we have a special mitzvah to say, make sure we include all those people in our celebration, not just be happy on our own, but reach out to others who might be feeling vulnerable or left out, and make sure we include them in our celebration, because our joy is not complete until we include everyone in our community and make sure everyone feels part of our community.
Dovid, you couldn't have said that any better, I promise you.
And I'm going to continue. Rashi over there stops and he says, is that too much?
No.
Rashi stops on those words, on those 4 categories of people that we need to look after, and says, Hashem tells us, if you look after my 4, so Hashem's 4 groups of people that really just call out to God because they don't have human people to rely on. God says, if we, Bnei Yisrael, if we, the Jewish people, look after those 4, he will then in turn look after our 4, our own homes and those who are near and dear to us.
Wow.
So it's in our best interest to look after each other, and it makes us feel better, when we feel like we're giving to others and we're helping everyone and helping each other feel connected. It strengthens us as well. So we all win at the end of the day.
Very profound.
Yeah.
I think is it the concept of mida keneged mida, in a way, that if we don't treat people who are vulnerable in the right way, then Hashem will sadly probably reciprocate in that manner.
Yeah, or karma. I'm going to move over now, but I'll watch you on the other screen.
David, you just appeared out of
out of nowhere. It's tied into the parsha about sorcery.
But it's interesting what your wife was saying was that there's another interesting concept, because it all speaks about the cities of refuge in this parsha, and there's it tells us over here in this week's parsha. I think it says tachin lecha derech. You need to sort of post signposts leading to tell people where they should run if, God forbid, they've committed an inadvertent murder and they need to run away from the girl Adam, from the avenger of the blood. They need to know how to get there straight away. You can't have detours and get lost. Sometimes when you travel, it's interesting to always look at the different signposts in different countries. But if you contrast that with when I used to go up at the Shalosh Regalim, I used to go up for the pilgrimage, there it says that you shouldn't put signs where how to get to Yerushalayim. And the question is, why not? Why can't we help? They didn't have Waze or Google Maps or whatever. And then the Torah says we wanted people to actually go and knock on their neighbor's door and say, what way to Yerushalayim? And they'd say, come in, have a bit of shawarma, have something to eat. And it would invoke camaraderie. So when it comes to positivity, we want to inspire re'ut and friendship and achdus. But of course, when it comes to matters of as serious as, God forbid, a murder, there's no time for small talk. And if somebody's going through a challenging time, the last thing they want you to do is to start schmoozing them about how their golf trip was last year. Sometimes I've seen this. You go visit a shiva house, and the person's sadly sitting there mourning a loved one, and in walks a visitor and says, "Oh, tell me, how was the weather last week when you're on holiday?" And I'm thinking, it's not time now to start making, to have direction, have it straight to the cities of refuge, understand the turmoil that the person is going through. But when it's time for your shalayim, when you're sitting in shul and you're schmoozing, then you can find out. So you got to have that balance and to know when to put a sign up and when to just, get things done, and when you can take a little bit of time to schmooze and to elaborate on things.
Yeah, very good. And the other the other kind of element of the overlap in this week's parasha. See, the parasha talks about these disparate topics, but they share themes, and it's really a really interesting tapestry of kind of how certain themes overlap, like the one about finding a halal basadeh, and then it says ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh. There's kind of these overlaps of themes of fields and trees, but there's also an overlap here about the responsibility we mentioned with the Eglah Rufah and kind of communal responsibility, leadership responsibility. What you mentioned just now with the cities of refuge, the Arei Miklat, and how the only way that this is not manslaughter. People make a mistake. They say it's not. It was an accidental taking of life. It wasn't through negligence or anything. So the interesting thing is that the only time that accidental murderer or killer could be freed from the city of refuge was when the high priest passed away, when the Kohen Gadol passed away. And so much so that the Gemara says that the mother of the Kohen Gadol would actually service these people who were in the Arei Miklat and look after them, and so that they wouldn't pray for the demise of her son, who was the high priest. An interesting little quirky story in the Gemara. But anyways, the main takeaway is, what's the connection? What's the connection between the high priest needing to pass away? What's the connection between the high priest's term of leadership and this accidental killer? And this is the extreme now that the Torah stretches this idea to almost. It says there is an interaction or a relationship between the leader of the generation, the spiritual leader of the generation, the high priest, and even accidental murders, even things that are negative, that seem to have no one that's culpable for them. They've just occurred. Even that has some relationship to the high priest, and even that kind of is linked to his tenure, linked to his time as a leader, and kind of only gets abrogated once his tenure comes to an end. So it's a really extreme example of this idea of leadership responsibility, of leaders putting up their hand and saying, I'm responsible, and when I am wrong, I will acknowledge it and admit, like you were saying before, about the power of the apology.
Without saying but, exactly.
And unequivocal apologies. And also the idea of, but this is not just for leaders. That's the mistake we make. It's communal. There is a great sensitivity and subtlety to the responsibility that we have for the shape of our society and what our society looks like. And if our society doesn't look like what we hoped and dreamed and want it to look like, well, then we have to be the ones to make the first move and contribute to do it. Even if it's, there was a famous sportsman quite recently who was seen after the game picking up rubbish from the stands. Even if it's a tiny, small gesture of making a world more like what you want it to be and what you envision it to be.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Well, I think we've covered quite a lot, and also we want to thank Rachel for her very profound contribution. And I think that inspired me that when I'll speak to you tomorrow, Dovid, we'll set up a time. We'll do a rabbis and rebbitzins chat. We'll have to pick a date for next. Maybe on the Erev coming out of lockdown next Thursday night, we can do something. I'll call you tomorrow to work it out. But if anyone has any questions, it's been very quiet in the chat. They must be really. We must be speaking so clearly and so profoundly that
Russell says they're all muted.
Well, now we can end the live stream.
Forced muting.
Well, that's because otherwise people push by mistake and it's noisy.
Not only are we locked down, but we can't even talk. That's what they're saying.
This is our little bit of power that we get. We can push mute all. I think we're going to end the live stream, and then we'll gladly unmute everyone so your questions can be done in a very safe space. You don't have to feel that you're broadcasting it to all of Facebook and all of social media, and your questions will forever be held on record somewhere in cyberspace. So we're going to end the live stream, and we thank everybody who watched on social media, who will watch this, and please join us when we do our next one, which we'll keep in touch.
Daniel, I have to point out that I when I advertised it